Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you. I'm a storyteller and I love call and response. I just got so much from that last presentation that it's just sort of left me going, all right, I just need to sit here and process this for a little bit. And I'm sure many of you feel in the same way. That was a lot of information to unpack. And that's what happens oftentimes when we don't hear the other side of the story, and then when truth is revealed from the other side of the story, it leaves us with much to think about. And that's kind of what's happening with me at the moment, so forgive me. I wanted to just jump up here and jump right into what I had to say. And I'm not real sure where it was that I was planning to jump right in here with what I had to say, but I will in some sort of way. I'm honored to have been invited. I know it was through the recommendation of a dear friend of ours, Kate Toll, who couldn't be here today because she is memorializing and her family, her brother, in Illinois this weekend, today, right now as we speak. Otherwise, she'd be here with us. So I just want to thank each of you for taking time and being here and acknowledging someone whose life has really inspired all of our lives. I had never even thought of the name Mahatma Gandhi until I started learning more about who? Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And everything was just filled with so many of his references to Gandhi. And that's how we began in our culture to learn more about him. So what's happened here today, to be able to speak with you, acknowledging the 152nd birth anniversary, is indeed historic and indeed an honor. I want to share one of my favorite quotes from Gandhi. "You must be the change you wish to see in the world. You must be the change you wish to see in the world." Now mine is a simple story, yet complex. I was hoping a video would have been shown. It came from NBC Nightly News after last year's murder of Mr. George Floyd in South Minneapolis. NBC Nightly News picked up on what we were doing and decided they wanted to cover it. And what were we doing? Well, sweet potato pies. That's what we were doing. And we were making the pies and we were bringing them into the community. Well, they did a great story. And that story ended up being one of their top stories for the year. I was sitting at home in December of last year, and all of a sudden I started getting text messages from people and saying, "Did you know that your story is on NBC Nightly News as one of the top stories of the year?" No. And I went and watched it again. And then I got a call from the Japanese press. Interesting. They wanted to come to the United States to follow me, but because of COVID, they weren't able to. They wanted me to know that my story and the story of Sweet Potato Comfort Pie would be one of 50 stories in the world that the Japanese press would be acknowledging. Well, you know, just like sitting here, I had to let that process for a few weeks. And then finally, I did get a call back in May of this year. Because COVID was still rampant and they couldn't come personally, they sent a photographer from New York City, and she spent 2 days with us taking photos. The story will come out within the next 2 weeks. We're going to do a Zoom call. We have Ms. Hannah, who is the director of Concordia Languages, Japanese, who will be on a Zoom call with us to interpret the story. But my understanding from Mr. Shogo is that the story will go across the country of Japan. And he said, we have 10 million readers. And I said, would you ask each one of them just to send a yen? And we'll be set. So we never know. And I go back to a pie, and not just a pie, but the sweet potato pie. What I was going to talk to you more about was called Releasing the Doves, a call for activating nonviolence. Releasing the doves. And I kind of got inspired by using that because about 2 weeks ago, I took a friend who had come from Tennessee, childhood friend, to visit. And I took her out to Paisley Park. Now, you're Minnesotan, so you know what Paisley Park is, but just in case somebody doesn't, that is the late musician Prince's home and studio, which is now an internationally recognized museum. And when I was there, I got kind of separated from the tour because I was struck by, on the second level, when you look up, there's a big giant cage. I don't know if you've been there or not, but the cage contains doves. And you could hear the doves. I don't know, maybe doves were crying. Is that what he's saying about? Remember when doves cry? All I know is I was just taken by that. And I got to thinking about Prince and his life, and I got to thinking about people. And what does a dove really mean? So I did a little bit of research, and I saw that if we go back in time, Egyptians believed the dove symbolized quiet, innocence. The Chinese felt that doves were a symbol of peace and long life. Early Greeks and Romans believed that doves represented love and devotion and care for family life. For many cultures, the dove represents peaceful soul. Many believe the dove symbolizes deliverance and God's forgiveness. The dove is said to be so pure that it's the only form that Satan cannot transform himself into. And I found myself thinking how images of Gandhi are often reflected with a dove next to it. So I came to realize we're doves. It is our duty to release ourselves into this society in ways that promote peace and love. The dove within us must be released despite the ugliness we see all around us. It was 2014 when I got this urge. Something spoke to me, and being spiritual, I just say it was the voice of God that said, make those sweet potato pies and take them down to Ferguson, Missouri. This was after young Michael Brown had been killed. And I got up from the television, you know, that's what we were doing. We were watching this on television, and we had just finished watching the trial of Trayvon Martin play out. And I'm thinking, make some pies and take them down? Well, not just the pie, but the sweet potato pie. I consider the sweet potato pie to be the sacred dessert of Black culture. I was born and raised in the rural south of Jackson, Tennessee, and I watched my grandmother and my great-grandmother make them. I watched all of the other relatives make them. I didn't. It wasn't until I was a grown woman, had married and moved to Denver, Colorado. One Sunday morning I got up, and for some reason, and you see, this is when the pie started calling me, because I didn't call it, because I don't even like to cook. But I called my grandmother, because my great-grandmother by now had passed away, and I said, I want to make a sweet potato pie. Of course, I didn't know how to. And I said, oh, so Mama, can you send me the recipe? And she said, I ain't got no recipe. It's up here. So she starts telling me what to do, and I tried to make it. I messed it up so badly. But something still told me to try it again. And so I did. And eventually I got it. The next thing I knew, whenever I would travel across the country to various places and the sweet potato pie was on the menu, I had to taste it. And if I liked it, I'd always ask, what exactly is in here? So then I started changing the recipe up a little bit and adding this and substituting that wherever I go if I liked it. And here we are now with the sweet potato recipe. So I started selling the dessert a little bit when I finally moved to Minnesota at farmers markets and things, and then eventually I stopped because it was just too much work. But here I am now, sitting in front of my TV this particular night, watching people who look like me in the streets, protesting, very upset. And then the rioting starts and the burning starts, and I'm wondering, what can I do? So when this voice said, make some pies and take them down to Ferguson, I thought, that's not normal. And perhaps it wasn't, but I did obey. And I went in and I made the pies a few weeks later and drove down. My son was in town and rode with me. But what I discovered when I got there, that initial round of protests had ceased because it was still, just like it is right now, quiet. Because people were waiting to see if there was going to be an indictment of that officer who had killed that young boy. So the only folks who were out on the streets that particular day were people like me who had traveled from around. And I saw this young girl standing at the makeshift memorial of young Michael Brown's, and she was just fussing, Michael, you shouldn't have been out here that day. You should have been inside. And I went over, and I had a box just like this with pies, because I made about 30 of them. And I went over to her, and I said, young lady, excuse me, did you know Michael? And she said, yes, I grew up with him. He lived right there. And she was pointing back to the apartments. You saw them on television, where he grew up in the projects with his grandmother. I said, I tell you what, I can do nothing for your loss, but I did bring some sweet potato pies. Would you like one? And she stopped fussing and she looked at me and started laughing and she said, what? I said, I've got a sweet potato pie here. And she opened it up and out came the aroma. And she said, this is really pretty. I said, well, thank you. They say it tastes pretty good too. And she started crying. And she just fell into my arms. And I embraced her back. And that's how those stories went. She shared some things. So many people did, as we told them about why I had brought those pies down. One woman had her little children. This was another stop in the area. She said, I can't eat this pie. She took the box and she just started rocking and going back and forth. She said, I can't. I said, well, why not? She says, because it reminds me of my mother. And when we grew up, we were all so poor, all we could eat was what we call soul food. And I wanted hamburgers and french fries and things from McDonald's. I didn't want that stuff. And now my mother's gone. And this pie reminds me of her. I'm gonna freeze it, and I'm gonna take it out when I need to. The various stories that we heard were many. So I came back home to my community of Golden Valley and I called my mayor, Shep Harris, and I said, we've gotta do something right here because what happened down there in Ferguson can happen here any day. And that's when we began having our Martin Luther King holiday weekend of service, in which that Saturday people come, volunteers, and they make the number of pies that Dr. King's age would have been. And it's one way to keep that number in the minds of people. I didn't know that. Sometimes things come to you, you just obey. You don't know where it's coming. You process it a little later. So this year, 2021, we made how many pies? Anybody know? 92. Dr. King would have been 92. So he was a young man. He was a young man when he began to be brilliant enough to pick up on the philosophies of Gandhi. He was a young man. You see in these photographs, 38, 39. And you wonder, how did that dove get released so early in life and know what he was supposed to do? Many people live longer than that and never figure it out. So that's what we began doing, making those pies each year. And we've grown. And then last summer, when COVID hit last year, I wondered how